Well, some exciting news from Ron Spomer Outdoors on a giveaway. We're actually going to give away something. We don't want to get you folks confused with all those scammers out there, but these are my lips moving as I promised, and we are going to be giving away something exciting. Stay tuned. We'll tell you all about it. First, we are going to hear from one of our Patreons, and then all of you who weighed in on the brush busting cartridge video. Man, did we get a lot of response from that one. And also Varmint cartridges. You guys really seem to be interested in those. So let's start with Palmer, one of our patrons, who's got some interesting things to say or ask about Elmer Keith, the big heavy bullet and handgunner from the 20th century. Palmer says, "Howdy, Ron. I have a question for you. WWEKD. I saw that and I thought, well, what kind of a misspelling is this for weekend? But apparently WWEKD means, what would Elmer Keith do? I am wanting to get into the world of handgun hunting, and while being a disciple of Elmer, I can't help but being torn between keeping it old school with iron sights or adapting to modern red dots for my revolver. I know it's tough to answer for a man who never saw a red dot, but I wonder what your thoughts would be on Elmer's thoughts on this." Lots of laughs. He was certainly a man of his period, but he often looked to push the boundaries on guns and ammo. Would you think old Elmer's would agree that red dots are sacrilegious or merely an instrument with which to get the most out of your handgun? Also, I'm not sure if you ever met or had dealings with Elmer, but if you did, I'd love to hear about them. I'm currently on my third read of his book, Hell, I Was There. So I hope you are well. Have a great weekend. Well, thank you, Palmer. And this is what I wrote back. I said, "Hey, Palmer, I won't pretend to speak for Elmer, but I'm thinking that he would turn up his nose at any kind of a sight defiling his six-shooters. He was too much of a gunslinger, and that requires a slick holster and a fast draw. I think he'd also shy from anything fragile or battery-powered. As you reread his book, Hell, I Was There, watch for his frequent references to raking shots. I studied this the last time I read that book, and it seems to me that he refers to going away north to south shots at game. His anecdotes often reference shots on elk and even grizzly bears, not only at extreme ranges, but under power and fleeing. So he's shooting them back to front. No wonder he liked extra heavy, hard cast bullets." That's kind of my latest take on Elmer. He was definitely a character, one heck of a shot with a six-gun as well as rifles. But he always advocated for big bullets, and I think it's because he was taking so many of these raking shots, he called them. He needed that bullet to have deep, deep penetration, to go from north to south, as I said. These days, most of us wait for a more sure shot, preferably broadside. So take that into consideration when you are thinking about whether you should adhere to what Elmer talked about back then. You certainly can't go wrong with bigger. Bigger is always better kind of thing, but you don't necessarily have to. So good luck with that, but I just don't think Elmer's going to be putting any kind of an extra sight on his handguns other than the open sights that he used. All right, now, before we dive into questions and comments from all of you on our other videos, I want to talk about this knife giveaway. What we're going to do is have a live meeting. What do you call them, Betsy?
Hangout.
A hangout.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be a hangout with me, so you can be there hanging out and asking me questions, and we're just going to have a campfire conversation. And this is for all of our patrons at the level 3. So if you're a level 3 patron, you will be able to jump in. I think we have a limit of 100 people who can be on it at once. So first come, first serve on this. But during this presentation, we are going to be drawing for a knife from Knives of Alaska, and it's this one with a beautiful blade. It's called the Alpha Wolf, and they're going to throw in their latest and greatest steel Magna Cut, which really keeps a sharp edge and it's easy to sharpen. It's just remarkable stuff. But it might not have this handle. I think it's probably going to have this handle, sort of a micarta handle, more of a synthetic one. At any rate, the retail value is $170 on that knife. So if you would like to have a crack at winning that knife, join up on Patreon at the level 3, and you can join us on that meet and greet, and we'll be visiting with you and seeing who wins that knife.
April 24th, 7 p.m.
Mountain
Standard Time.
Daylight Savings Time.
And 2025.
Oh, boy, we got to put all that stuff in case somebody watches this further down the road and thinks it's in 2026. But if these work out, they may be. We're just thinking we're going to do a little more interactive stuff with you folks, and we thought we'd get started with our patrons because obviously they're kind of special, and we'll just see how well it works. But there could be some knife giveaways coming down the pike.
Plus, we're going to give away a signed copy of 7mm Ron Spomer book and the Predator Hunting.
Oh, leave it to Betsy to make the sales pitches, for which I was supposed to. So that's going to be exciting. All right, now let's get to our questions and comments. Most of these are going to be from the video about the ultimate brush busting cartridge, which is the 30-30 or the 360 buck hammer or the 308 that we tested in a video. That video did pretty darn well. And then the other questions are going to be on Varmint cartridges. We did one. Kind of the history of Varmint cartridges. Went back as far as we could and tried to include all of them. But boy, according to several of you, we missed a few. And we may have gotten a few things wrong, so we're going to listen to your comments here. First of all, the Ultimate Brush Busting Cartridge is our first video that's been out now for a couple of weeks. And we heard from Ken, who said, one of the most interesting videos I have ever seen, not just on your channel. Of course, I expected deflection, but how much or how little? Very interesting. And then Ogali666 said, hey, awesome video and good information. So apparently Tate and I did some pretty good work there in revealing some of the performance of these bullets being shot through brush. We shot a 30-30, as I said, with a 170 grain bullet. They were all core-lock bullets from Remington because those kind of set the standard. That and the Winchester bullets, I think those set the standards for so many decades with the 30-30 in brush that we thought that would be a fair comparison. Then we used a 360 buck hammer, which is our replacement for the 35 Remington. It's kind of the modern version that does about the same thing, a little more powerful. And then we threw in a 308 Winchester with a modern style bullet just to see if the ogive, the curvature of the nose of that bullet, had something to do with knocking it off course while shooting through brush. So you might want to check that video out because we did quite a bit of shooting through some brush and a lot of brush and saw some really interesting results. So let's hear from Reki78. As a Pennsylvania hunter, this is a long-running topic of debate among our state's hunters. Plenty of 30-30 and 35 Remington guys who will swear by the ability of their rifles to shoot through brush. As a 308 Winchester guy, my opinion is that the slower rounds won't deflect as much, but they are not brush-proof, much as your video illustrated. All right, this is Tim75. I would be interested to see how a 4570 would perform with that same test. We mentioned that during this video that we thought that might even be a better brush busting bullet, and if you guys were interested, we might do a show on that. And it seemed like you guys are interested because Tim here, his comment got an additional 25 replies, so people are interested in it. Chris 741 said, no serious hunter hunts with a 4570. End of story, right? Well, no, because the next guy up, David7059, says, seriously? I know lots of folks that use a 4570. And Red Iron 44 says, way overkill for something like a whitetail. Rush Creek says, no better whitetail cartridge than a 4570. So one of them thinks it's overkill, the other one says it's no better. Boy, we are going to have to do a test with this 4570. Shatner's says, I was totally thinking about the 4570. So if you do end up making a video on it, I would love to see it. Well, looks like we're probably going to have to do this. Deveretti says, please, please, please do a 4570 and use jacketed, hard cast lead, and an all copper expanding bullet. That would be a really cool comparison. And that is a great idea, Denver. It's not the cartridge so much as the bullet that's doing all of this brush busting and penetrating, right? So that's really what we want to test. And that's pretty much what we did test with the video that's already out there, because we had round-nosed traditional bullets in the 30-30 and the 360 buckhammer, and then that curved pointed bullet in the 308. And I think that did prove a few things about which one is likely to deflect the most. But also we could change the bullet from soft to hard, and that might have an effect. And I think we're going to do that with that 4570. So I want to thank everyone for commenting on that. Obviously, there are many, many more comments. If you want to see it, just go to that video and start reading the comments, and maybe you can agree and disagree with several folks on there. All right. Now, it looks like some of these guys now are talking about whether this whole brush idea is so much about the cartridge or the rifle. And Jason was one of the first, and he says, my first deer rifle was a Marlin 30-30. I grew up hearing about these brush guns. The funny thing is that it never even occurred to me that people were talking about actually shooting through brush with it. I was well into my 20s before I learned that they weren't just referring to the handy, quick-shooting rifle for close-range hunting. I've seen enough tracers doing night fire in the Army that careened off and they did crazy things, and I know that it doesn't take much to fling a bullet off to the next county. I saw a tracer once hit the ground and start spinning and fly straight up about 10 feet and then fall straight back down to the ground. It looked like fireworks. Well, the Canadian says, I always figured a brush gun was a shorter and easier to maneuver rifle in thick brush, with a heavier bullet to maybe handle a twig or two. But shooting through all that kind of brush? Now, that's nutty, but it's a very interesting video to watch. Well, thank you, Canadian. And yeah, we did shoot through a lot of brush. But these are great points you guys are bringing up. Are we talking about the brush gun? When most people say, oh, use a brush gun, do they mean the gun or the cartridge? It just seems like so many people have assumed that they're talking about the 30-30, especially being such a great cartridge for hunting in the brush. So I think it does pay for us to specify when we're talking about this. Do you mean the gun, the rifle, or do you mean the cartridge or the bullet, or all of them taken together? Great points, guys. Oh, now here's another take on it. And this is, I call it the thread the needle approach. Some people think it's more about not hitting the brush when you're hunting in the brush. So let's see what Craig56 has to say. I have threaded the needle several times and I never had a problem. The other factor you have to consider is the distance of the animal from the brush. If an animal is standing in brush, the deflected bullet won't go as far off as if he were standing, say, 10 yards behind the brush where the bullet could veer off farther. So maybe go down to a 243 Winchester so you can sneak it through more easily. And that's interesting because the next guy up, Randall, commented, Jim Carmichael, back almost 50 years ago, he was a gun editor for Outdoor Life magazine. Jim wrote that one of the best brush cartridges is the 243 Winchester because it shoots flat enough that you can shoot through a fairly small hole in the bush with no deflection. Of course, that means you can actually see the hole, and several people commented about with the scope, maybe you can see the branches and twigs a little bit better with open sights like on a 30-30, maybe not. So something else to consider. But during our presentation, when we were shooting through brush, we did try to kind of pick a hole to shoot through. And gosh, on one of those, Tate was shooting the 30-30 Model 94 with the open sight, and he got a group about 1.5 inch, 3-shot group through all kinds of brush, but he tried to pick a hole, and based on that group size, he did it. So it can be done. You can thread the needle. Now here is Josh9336, and he says, The conclusion to all this video is shooting through brush is rolling the dice. And that probably is the best summation of the whole program, because some of our shots got through just fine, but so many of them landed sideways. Some of them were broken up. We found pieces of bullets downrange and parts, and it was crazy what was going on from hitting all those branches. Well, that was a great discussion, and we want to thank all of you guys for commenting on that stuff. Now let's change it up here and talk about varmint cartridges, because we got a lot of comments on that as well. The video is called The Grand History of Varmint Cartridges. Tate and I sat here and discussed as many of the varmint cartridges from up to 22 caliber that we could. I don't have every one of them, obviously, from history, because some of them were pretty obscure. Some of them were pretty old, but we had quite a few. But you guys clued us in here with some of your comments on what we missed, what we got right, and what we got wrong. So let's just hear what you all have to say. Cro-Magnum says, it's content like this that just brings me joy like no other. I really appreciate your knowledge and the value in sharing it. Well, thanks for that, Crow. It's good to hear that you really enjoyed it. Let's see what Skipper has to say. Hey, great video despite the misplaced apostrophe. Oh, yeah, we really caught it for this one. This is really embarrassing for me, Mr. English teacher here. I'm a stickler for good grammar and punctuation and syntax so that we're clear. So many times we just communicate rather poorly and people don't necessarily understand what we're saying. And believe it or not, something as simple as an apostrophe can make a difference in the meaning. And our team made a title that I didn't even see on the thumbnail that put an apostrophe in varmint cartridges. Well, cartridges is supposed to be plural, meaning all of them, not possessive. When you put an apostrophe S, it means the cartridge owns something. The cartridge's performance or something. At any rate, several of you sharp folks out there caught this one and took me to task on it. I apologize, and I feel really bad because I'm supposed to be the expert. Duh. So it goes. Don't get too cocky. They'll bring you back down to earth. But I want to thank you guys for pointing that out. All of these little comments and things help us to produce a better show, so keep cranking them out. David, what do you have to say here? Dear Lord, David said, what has happened to people's knowledge of English? Oh, you have more on this one. The title says varmint cartridges. Why did apostrophes make things plural? They must really teach nothing in schools anymore. Now, David has it right when he writes, Dear Lord, what happened to people's knowledge of English? He has an apostrophe after the S in people's, which is correct. People's is plural, but then all these people have the knowledge, and that makes it a possessive. You didn't think you were going to get a grammar lesson, did you guys? We'll get away from grammar and get back to the shooting here in a second, but I appreciate it, guys. All right, here we go. Jim1124 says, Mr. Spomer, I really enjoy your Grand History of Varmint Cartridges video. I started hunting varmints in 1974. I still hunt California ground squirrels with many different varmint cartridges. I shoot squirrels with all of the following. Wow, this is a long list, guys. 22 rimfire, 22 Winchester Magnum rimfire, 17 HMR, 20 Vartag, 20 practical, 20 PPC, 222 Remington, 223 Remington, 222 Remington Magnum, 225 Winchester, that's a rare one, Wilbur Hawk, and an Australian Martina in 219 Donaldson's Wasp. That must be a custom rifle. 219 Donaldson's Wasp. Boy, you don't see many of those around. A 220 Weatherby Rocket. That was a short-lived little cartridge that Weatherby cranked out way back when. He gave it up and replaced it later with the 224 Weatherby Magnum. But at any rate, Jim here has one. Wow. Oh, and he says it's his favorite Coyote cartridge, and it's getting 4,020 feet per second. What? With a 55 grain TTSX and a 55 grain ballistic tip? Holy mackerel. That's the fastest I've ever heard of a 220 of any kind. And then he also says he has a ballistic tip and a 6.47 Lapua. Yeah, we didn't cover the 243s, any of the 24s. We stopped at 22s. We thought maybe down the road we could do a varmint history on the 24s and 25s because a lot of people prefer those. But gosh, we had such a long line of cartridges here. We could have gone on for days. Let's see. Jim finishes up by saying, if you contact me, I will be pleased to send you a copy of the cartridges I have. Thanks for all the good videos you make. Well, appreciate that, Jim. I might just take you up on some of that because I could use some demonstration cartridges that you mentioned here that I don't have, like the 219 Donaldson's Wasp and that 220 Weatherby Rocket. Are you kidding? I'd love to have one of those. We may have to get together. All right, let's see what Mac has to say. Glad that I finally found someone to mention the 225. My father hunted for deer for many years with his 225, and my family has told me that he was deadly accurate with it, often possibly filling more tags than he had. My grandfather had several rifles, but his 222 was always in his pickup. Coyotes, skunks, badgers, and yes, even many deer were taken with it. In his later years, he may have taken a pheasant or two with it. Well, I hope grandfather was living at least 50 decades or 50 years ago, because this kind of illicit performance a field we frown on these days. But yeah, you've got to be realistic. Country folk have been doing that sort of thing for a long time. It's one thing when you're feeding your family and you have plenty of wildlife about, but we do not advocate for folks these days going out and breaking game laws. I think we're way past that era. All right, ST9RT says, price makes choosing easier these days. Price, huh? He says the 17 Winchester Super Magnum at $40 per round is a good buy, and the 25-grain polymer tip bullet packs a punch, and it's accurate for my skill level out to 200 yards. The 25-06 and 75-grain is a nice round when you hand-load it carefully. Well, I'm glad to hear from you on that 17 WSM ST. Not a lot of people know about that or seem to care, but it is, from pretty much all ballistic angles, the most powerful, probably the best rimfire cartridge we have these days. It's much faster, flatter shooting and everything else than the 22 Win Mag. It's essentially it's even a bigger version of case than that one. Instead of using that and necking it down to 17 the way the HMR did, Winchester went to a construction cartridge for pounding nails. The nail guns that are powered by a case like that. And there's a pretty good sized one. And they took that as the basis for building this 17 Winchester Super Magnum. So it's a powerful 17 in a rimfire, most powerful one we have. I've got several videos on it if you want to go to my regular channel, Ron Spomer Outdoors, and search for the 17 WSM. I think you'll kind of be surprised at some of the numbers that thing cranks out. All right. Fusako says, not going to be hauling them around in the woods. He's got quotes around that, so I think he's referring to what I must have said, or Tate. And he says, Ron, the rifle that I learned precision shooting on was a 6mm Remington 700 Varmint rifle with a 26-inch bull barrel and a loopholed very power scope. It was our family deer hunting rifle. We used to take it pronghorn out to 400 yards. But I came from a large family of dairy farmers, so hauling awkward things around is kind of our day job. Well, hey, if you guys are comfortable with these 10 to 13 pound big, heavy target rifles, call them varmint rifles, you are going to get extra performance out of them because of those really long barrels. And then those big, massive barrels heat up more slowly, so you should be able to get a few more shots out of them before they overheat. And just a lot of reasons to have those. I've never really enjoyed them as much as a sporting rifle. I just really love the carry and the feel and the quick action of a lightweight sporting rifle. Those big, heavy ones, they just feel so clunky to me. And that's just my style. All right, let's see what Dwayne has to say. Hey, Ron, nice job here. But you should have given the 221 Remington Fireball some love. It was around from 1963 and onward. You could argue that the 22BR, that's a bench rest, and the 22ARC deserve mention also. Oh, I forgot those. Oh, also the 22 PPC. Yeah, the 22 PPC was out in the late 70s. Palmer and Pisano or somebody like that. They were bench rest shooters, and they discovered these short, fat cartridges, the 22 and the 6mm PPC. Those were pretty darn effective, and a lot of people applied them to varmints. Now, the 22 ARC, I just completely forgot about that one. That's a new 22 out from Hornady. I think it's designed to fit in the AR-15 platform, so think .223 Remington length or 5.56 NATO length on that one, but a fatter case, I would guess. I really haven't even looked into that ARC because when I heard about the 22 Creedmoor, I thought that's the one I'm interested in because that's the equivalent of my 22 250 Ackley Improved. And it comes with a fast twist barrel and some big long bullets for long-range shooting and all that good stuff. So we'll have to dive into that ARC. Now, the 22 bench rest, that's not really a SAMI cartridge, so I think you're going to have to do obviously some hand loading on that one. I don't think any company even loads for that one, but thanks for bringing those up. Oh, now, Beth said, Ron, you missed 2 of them. Let's see which 2 I missed that Beth caught. The 219 Donaldson's Wasp. Someone already mentioned that, but you're right. That was developed in the 1930s, and it was a screamer of a varmint cartridge. It was not widely popular because it preceded modern scope optics that would have utilized its full potential. Another not-so-popular varmint option in the 1960s was the .264 Winchester Magnum using lightweight bullets. It was popular with ultra-long-range chuck hunters in New York and Pennsylvania back when eastern coyotes were still extinct. Still extinct? Well, if they're extinct, they're still extinct. I think you mean, well, here we go with grammar again, extirpated. Extirpated means you've wiped an animal out of an area, but it's not extinct. Extinct means it's not on Earth, it's not on Mars, it's nowhere. It's gone. But that's interesting about the .264 Winchester. Not many people think about that as a varmint round, but you're right. I think that's part of the reason it got this reputation for burning barrels. Varmint shooters shoot what we call high volume. You know, there's a chuck, there's another chuck, there's a prairie dog, and you can just shoot. You do that with something like a .264, you're going to burn that barrel out. So they may have really done that cartridge a misservice because I don't hear too many deer hunters or elk hunters saying they've shot a barrel out for the few times you shoot at game. So keeping that thing as a big game cartridge is probably a smart way to go. But I can see the need for a little extra reach. You know, back in those days, we didn't have the high BC bullets, and we didn't have the range finders, which was really the big limitation. So if you saw a rock chuck out there at a real far distance and you quite didn't know what it was, having a super fast cartridge would shoot really flat. You could misjudge the distance by 20 to maybe as much as 50 yards and still hit it with a dead-on hold or slightly over. So there was value in something like that. But you just can't shoot rapid fire and expect that barrel to last. Now, here's a question from Impact Tracing. How did they chronograph loads back in the early days? We have answered this several times before, but it comes up often enough that I think it's worth airing again. One of the techniques was have a plate. I don't know if it was lead or steel, probably steel, but a plate of certain weight hanging for free swing. And then they would hit it with a certain amount of energy or a bullet known with certain velocity from military tests or something and see how far back it swung. And then they would measure that backswing, the distance it went, and make the computations to determine how much energy had been applied to that. So then you knew you had so many foot-pounds of energy when your bullet smacked that target. Another one was a really interesting one. It was an axle with wheels on both ends of it. So think of a long axle. I'm holding a pen up now to demonstrate. And put a disc like a wheel on one end of it and put another disc like a wheel on the other end. Make it really long so that you had time for the bullet to hit the spinning wheel. As that thing spun around at a certain speed, the bullet would penetrate the paper on the first wheel, and then when it penetrated the paper on the back wheel at the end of that axle, obviously that wheel had moved a little bit farther. Once again, you've got your measurements, and then you can tell what the velocity was. There's your chronograph. There were a few others, but they had some pretty creative ideas and made them work back in the day. That's a marvelous thing about humans, is our ability to think and use our hands to put stuff together like that. I would have never come up with those ideas. You know, we always say that our improvements and inventions are always by standing on the shoulders of the great ones who came before us, like Newton and Einstein and all that. But there's always that one individual who breaks through and thinks that something that no one else has thought before, or builds something that no one else has ever built before, and then the next generation builds on that, and we keep progressing. So I'm kind of tickled that we now have things like this new Garmin chronograph that is Doppler, and it's just this little cigarette box size thing. You sit on the table and it never misses. It's pretty amazing. All right, now, who else do we have here? Oh, this is more about Varmint cartridges. This is from John F60. Hey, I enjoyed this video immensely. Varmint cartridges are my main love in the gun world. Ron's description of how varmint hunting came to be is spot on. Well, thank you for that, John. It's not often I get a spot on so much as a spot off. And now John goes on to say that people living on small farms in rural parts of the country had pest animals that had to be dealt with, or they would eat their gardens and their crops and their chickens. In those days, they shot them with anything they had. Most often, it would be a 22 rimfire or a single-shot shotgun. That's what my grandpa used. He kept a 410 single-shot, cheapy shotgun by the door, and he would shoot skunks and coons and whatever got into the chickens. And I actually borrowed that to shoot my first pheasants. Cool. John goes on to say, hey, maybe a 25-20 or a 32-20 lever gun. Yeah, those are ones that I didn't cover just because they were really old black powder rounds that were kind of the early varmint cartridges. But I didn't think they really fit the mold because I don't know that they were specifically designed for what we consider to be long-range varmint shooting these days. But I guess given the slow velocities of all the black powder rounds back in those days, they would have been. So, hey, you want to look up that 25-20 someday. That stands as the cartridge that took the world record whitetail deer in Wisconsin. Have you ever heard of the Jordan buck? That's the one. That gentleman who shot that buck, I think it was around 1914 or something, he was using this puny little 25-20. There's a 25 caliber bullet pushed by just 20 grains of black powder. So it was pretty darn weak. And I guess he had to shoot that buck several times and track it a long ways before he finally finished it off. But kind of what made that thing famous. Let's see what else John has to say. Over time, people with a bit more money started shooting these pest animals as sport, and that led to what we now know as varmint rifles. The heavy barrels, wider forends on the stock, so they would sit steadily on sandbags. Those became common features. It is hard to imagine how the 220 Swift was viewed first released to the public, considering its competition at the time in the 1930s. For me personally, varmint hunting is the shooting of groundhogs or woodchucks in large bean or hay fields. It's mainly a shooting sport, unlike predator hunting, which is more hunting than shooting. Varmint shooters like to shoot so that they gravitate to animal species in situations with lots of targets. Prairie dogs are the ultimate experience for the traditional varmint shooter. We used to have alfalfa fields that drew in lots of groundhogs that played a key role in my interest in varmint hunting. Over the years, I have managed to buy rifles chambered for 17 Remington, 22 Hornet, 218B, 221 Fireball, 22 250 Remington, 220 Swift, 22 Cheetah Mark II, and the 6mm Remington. They all have their place. One interesting fact about the 22 250's release as a factory cartridge is that Browning brought out rifles for it in 1964, which is 1 year before Remington even loaded the factory ammunition. They correctly anticipated that it would be a success. Oh yeah, those WSSM cartridges do have one nice feature, and that is they stand up very well on your loading bench because of that huge base. You don't even need a loading block for putting in the powder. Those are some good observations, John. All right. Oh, I missed some more. Dwayne says, Ron, you did a nice job, but you should have given the 221 Remington Fireball some love. Yeah. You're not the first one to mention that. Okay, who else do we have here? Will Cook. Will says, Ron, love the video. As always, you guys skipped over some great early varmint rounds. Here we go with that 25-20 again. Oh, here's a little mistake from Will. He says, it was tiny, but it was responsible for taking the hole in the horn buck. Hey, yeah, you got the right idea, but the wrong buck here, Will. The hole in the horn buck is this massive, non-typical with all kinds of palmation. I think it's number 2 in the world now, but for a time there it was number 1. But that was a found dead buck, I think run over by a train. And they found the body, and they estimated it must have been a 300 to 400 pound deer with this incredible rack. And some local guy got a hold of it and mounted it and put it up in a bar. I think it was in Ohio. But this thing had a hole in one of the palms down on its antler. And they would always discuss, wow, who made that hole in there? Did somebody shoot it with a... And they would try to guess the caliber and all this stuff, and all these stories flew around until finally they found a guy who knew exactly why that hole was there. The mount on the wall, because of those big heavy antlers, kept sliding over to the side and threatening to fall off. So they drilled a hole in the antler and put a piece of wire on it to keep it on the wall. And that became the name of it. It was the famous hole-in-the-wall buck. But it wasn't shot with a 25-20. It was probably hit by the train. It was the Jordan buck hit by the 25-20. All right, we're getting toward the end here. What did Robert have to say? Hey, Ron, you're always talking about hide and pelt damage. Is there a market for those hides, or do you just use them yourself? Robert, I'm glad you asked this because it really brings up, I think, an important point about wasting natural resources. Those of you who listen to me fairly often know that I'm always talking about, nature, what she provides for us, and sustainable use of. You think about what keeps life on Earth alive, and it's nature and all of her products, right? The sun shines, the grass grows, the animals eat it, other animals eat the animals, and the cycle of life goes. That's just how it works. And we've gotten to the point in our civilization where we seem to think that humans are not part of this anymore. We just buy our food from the grocery store. And of course, anyone who has a little connection to the land understands that you've got to have crops and animals of some kind to provide these things. And that includes clothing. So for ancient times, we were using animal skins for clothing to keep us from the cold. And then we discovered linens and cotton and different plant materials that could make some pretty good clothes. And these days we have polyesters that everybody wears, which is really kind of as far from green as you can get. If you're an environmentalist and you're running around with polyester on, that comes from petroleum. So my point is that nature provides us with a useful resource, animal skins, and we wear them on our belts and our shoes, other leather products from cattle mostly, but wild animals provide these same things. And fur is one of them. It's a great insulator, et cetera, et cetera. So some people say, yeah, but if you just shave a sheep and make a wool garment, you haven't killed the sheep. Well, eventually that sheep is going to die. So if your raccoon dies or your coyote dies, whether it's run over on the road or killed by another predator or you shoot it, there's a valuable product lying right there, and that's the fur. So why not utilize it? In so many places, we are having animal damage control officers in various parts of the government who have to go out and take care of skunks under porches and raccoons in attics and in crops and all sorts of things. And why waste that material? And for ages, we would utilize it. And when I was a kid, fur was valuable. So when I shot a coyote or a fox, I didn't want to break it up, tear it up, and damage it. So I tried to find cartridges and bullets that would enable me to put a small hole in it, and then it would still be a good, valuable piece of natural material. And these days we've gotten away from that with the anti-fur movement and everything, and now we're essentially wasting hundreds of thousands of furbearers that are lying dead on the roads, or somebody traps or shoots them to get them out of the hen house, and et cetera, and they just get wasted. So that's what really bugs me. Sorry for the lecture, guys, but think about it and spread the word. We are wasting a wonderful natural resource.
So how much does a coyote skin now cost? Do you know what the price is?
I heard $5 this year. When I was a kid in the early 70s, I was getting $30 to $35. Think of the value of money in 1970 versus today, and now the value is down to $5. Well, who can even go out or even bother to skin one if you do get one?
Well, your ammunition's more than the...
yeah. A lot of guys shooting some big, heavy rounds are probably shooting a $5 shot to get a coyote. Oh, gosh. Yeah, it's just a shame. We can discuss that later. If you're interested in it, guys, weigh in and make some comments on it. But it is really one of my kind of pet peeves. Okay, here's a couple of guys who kind of missed the boat on this one. Roy says, hey, where are the 22 mags? And NT Wicked Bunch says, man, no 20 calibers? Well, guys, both of those are in there. I have the 22 Winchester Magnum, and I have the 204 Ruger, which is the 20, the only commercial 20 we have, and they were in the show. And the reason I threw those in is just to remind folks, pay attention. Pay attention. Sometimes I guess I go over it a little bit too fast, perhaps, but it's in there, so don't just assume I forgot something unless you've carefully watched. Well, I guess that's all the questions we have for now. We've got a 40-minute show rolling right here, and that's probably what Betsy wants. So don't forget about.
Wait a minute, that's not what.
That's not what you want?
Well, I do. I will ask the audience what they want, but we're going to answer questions from the videos from the previous week on Tuesday, and most Thursday we'll have questions from our website and comments.
Oh, that's what you're doing.
I'm making you work harder.
You are making me do the threatened 2 a week. So the next one is going to be all the comments that are off the website.
Correct.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll let people make a decision of what they want us to do.
All right. Well, I would imagine the folks who commented on the website wouldn't mind having their comments aired and answered here. So stay tuned for that when the next podcast. You say it's going to be on a Thursday?
We think, yes.
We think. Okay, so this one shows up on Tuesday, and then our regular video on Ron Spomer Outdoors shows up on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, there will be a new one on comments from the website, and I get to work every night of the week. This is so much fun.
I have more plans.
Oh, save me, guys. Save me. Hey, everybody, I want to really thank you for all of these great comments and questions. Let us know how we're doing, and if you want us to change it up a little bit. Several guys have been saying they would like to see a show every week in which I just read some old stories or relate some old hunting anecdotes and stuff, and we can certainly do that. We've tried them from time to time, and some folks seem to like them. We want to weigh in a little bit more on that one before we start. But yeah, if you guys want me to read some stories and things and talk about hunts from 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago, I think I can probably dredge a few up.
I think you should rewrite a book.
Rewrite a book?
Right. Your old stories in a book.
Write it or read it?
No, write it first. A computation.
These people are listening to a podcast, honey. They don't want to sit here and listen to me type a new book.
Never mind.
Never mind, folks. I'm writing a new book, but I'll read the old ones. Okay. Hey, guys. Thanks for weighing in. We'll see you next time. Hunt honest and shoot straight.